Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let us now turn to the question of economic program. We have three programs that are here on the table from Republicans, and this includes Kaine, the 999 program, Perry with the flat tax, and the Ron Paul proposal. Now, remember, the criteria for these essentially have to be compare this to what I am recommending, because my program represents, with 5 or 6 points, depending on how it's articulated, an actual recovery program. In other words, it is a package of measures that are designed, when taken together, to end the Depression and switch over to a period of high technology growth and full employment without imposing genocide or unreasonable sacrifices of any kind, really, on the American people, except for certain very limited strata. And even there, the tax increases, for example, are exclusively, in my plan, the Wall Street sales tax. In other words, to tax speculative transactions and not anybody's income in any way, apart from maybe returning to the pre-Bush tax levels. Remember the five concepts of the 5 points. The first one is to wipe out fictitious capital, to wipe out debts and fictitious capital that are a result of speculation, money laundering, and things like this. This has got to be wiped out. It has no validity, and in the form of the $1 trillion of student loans, these debts should never have been contracted, and they must be canceled. Similarly for Greece. There's too much derivatives debt crushing the Greeks and the other nations of Europe. They've got to use the inherent power of the state to wipe out large amounts of that fictitious capital. The second question is the private central banks. They must be nationalized. They must be turned into national banks, and they must then use their credit-creating power for production in a series of tranches of €1 trillion, $1 trillion, 0% long-term maturities, because that's the kind of infrastructure you're going to be starting with. And that gets us to the third point, extremely ambitious infrastructure programs to restart the economy based not on Keynesian stimulus, but on actual hard commodity production carried out through the private sector and producing permanent jobs and producing a multiplier effect. The fourth point, no cuts in the social safety net. Genocide is not an option. The trained labor power of the countries involved is their number one asset, and there must be no tampering with mental capital, human capital, which is going to be sacrificed if you cut the social safety net. And 5, an international agreement to restart world trade on the basis of high technology development of Africa, South Asia, and the poorer parts of Latin America. Now, we must also realize the crisis we're in now did not come from government deficits. It did not come from government spending. Go back to 2007, 2008. You all lived through it. It was a derivatives panic. Derivatives existed only because they were deregulated. Derivatives were banned from 1936 to 1982 under the Commodities Exchange Act, and then it was the process from Reagan to Wendy Graham to Reuben, Summers, and Clinton that brought them back, rehabilitated them, and then made them into a bubble. So deregulation caused the Depression, and if you're worried about Fannie and Freddie, privatization made Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, what they were. The crisis was not caused by government debt, and it is absurd to think that you can fight a depression by reducing government debt, balancing budgets, and so forth. There are no historical examples. In short, austerity does not work, and we'll go into this in some detail. From Bräuning in Germany in the 1930s to Schwarzenegger in California to Papandreou today and to the Socrates or whatever government is there in Portugal now, it shows again and again, budget cuts don't balance the budget. Budget cuts give increased deficits. There are no exceptions. Now let's look at, first of all, the Kaine plan, 999. 9% income tax with no exemptions and no deductions, 9% corporate income tax, and 9% national sales tax. Well, the general problem with this is it is coherent with the Republican reactionary plan to shift the cost of the Depression off the privileged strata, the Wall Street parasites and so forth that have created this mess, and shift it on to working people, the poor, and destroy the middle class in the process. Let's just start. The income tax, remember, under current provisions, a significant amount of your income at least is shielded by the standard deduction, depending on whether you're married, filing jointly, head of household, single, whatever you are, and the standard deduction, and then the personal exemption that you get $3,500 to $4,000 off for each child. These would disappear, and the mortgage interest deduction, which many people have built their entire financial strategy in life, this would also disappear. The corporate income tax would go down to 9%. Right now it's above 30%. Nobody pays it as it is now. I don't know who's going to pay the corporate income tax. He claims it's going to be easier to collect. The sales tax goes to 9%. Now, this is a 9% federal sales tax above and beyond the 10% sales tax you have, say, in a place like California. And he wants the 9% on groceries, on your food bill, on the biggest item in the budget of poor people. This is all regressive taxation. This crushes anybody who works for a living, anybody in the middle class, and it glorifies the financial parasites. Because if it's a consumption tax, remember that even the most profligate, hedonistic billionaire can't spend all the money he gets. You can't drink that much. You can't gorge yourself on caviar and champagne to get up into the billions. So for a lot of these people in the upper brackets, the amount of consumption they spend is a small part of their income. Whereas the poorer you are, the consumption part approaches 100%. So this is going to hit the poor. It is regressive taxation, and it will destroy the U.S. middle class. Therefore, Kane, the former Federal Reserve official, is, of course, incompetent, and his program would indeed inflict genocide on the American people. And this is where we have to draw the line. Now, let's look at Rick Perry. Rick Perry says he wants the flat tax. He has not provided the details. This is probably the Steve Forbes flat tax. This was rejected even by Republicans in 1996 when they went with Dole and 2000 when they went with Bush. There's one tax rate. There are no brackets. The poorest person pays the same percentage of their income, because it's an income tax, on income as anybody else. So this is also a regressive tax. Now, people will say, well, it's really a proportional tax, isn't it? Yeah, except that in practice, proportional means regressive in the sense that it cuts into the necessities of the poor more than it cuts into the amenities of the middle class and the luxuries of the rich and the super rich. So this is another plan, ultimately, and we'll see the details when he comes out with it, to shift the cost of the Depression from financiers and their similar beneficiaries of the current system onto the backs of working people. Now we come to the Ron Paul proposal, and I'm told this is not the work of Peter Schiff anymore.